All right, good afternoon and welcome to Seven Hills Fellowship. We are glad that you're joining us today. For those of you who have been tuning in over the last several months, you know that these Tuesday devotionals we've been doing have really served the purpose of introducing you to some folks in Seven Hills Fellowship, but also having the opportunity then to hear their stories of suffering and brokenness, and in particular how God has buoyed them and strengthened them in the midst of that suffering. Today, I've got Tricia Steele here with us, and so I'm going to turn things over to you, Tricia, if that's okay, and just let you introduce yourself to the people of Seven Hills Fellowship, and then really just share your story with us. So thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Sure, thanks. So I'm Tricia. I'm an entrepreneur and involved in several projects around Rome, and I guess I will kind of summarize and share a little bit of my health journey over the last really 2 decades of my life. And I shared this with Brian, but I will acknowledge that while a lot of that is in the rearview mirror and behind me, it's still very much a road that I am walking, and that a journey I am still to this very day sometimes struggling with, worse and better on different days. So I will share that. I guess by the time I was 18, by the time I reached adulthood, I'd checked off any number of boxes on that list of like stressors and trauma, childhood sexual abuse, really, really bad divorce from my parents, multiple remarriages, and then leaving my home pretty early at about 16. And I started to have a lot of physical just symptoms that started to affect my life here and there in college. I was a super non-traditional. I'm a super non-traditional human. I do everything kind of out of order, but I did not go straight through school and took a pretty circuitous path. But for like 10 years, I had all manner of things that were happening in my body and that no one could explain. I kept being told by doctors that, well, your labs are normal. Like everything's normal. You're normal. Like we don't know what's happening. I was, gaining tremendous amount of weights in the beginning, and not able to sleep, and then staying up for days on end, and then I started having a lot of pain, a lot of joint pain, and it progressed and progressed. And I was sitting in a classroom at Berry College at maybe 23 or so, and an ovarian cyst ruptured in the middle of class, and I had to sort of crawl to the dorm, and without insurance and no other financial or other support, try to figure out like, how do I get care, and what's happening, and that happened probably 4 or 5 times over the course of a couple of years before I finally was able to get a few answers. And this wonderful nurse practitioner finally listened to my story and understood that something was going on. It was getting worse, and tested me for autoimmune disease. And so we discovered that I did have an autoimmune disease of my thyroid, and it was just full blown. If 30 was high, I was at like 3,000 or something. But as we got control of that, it's a very simple thing to control, seemingly. A lot of those things started to die away. But then I experienced bouts with endometriosis. So I had to have several surgeries to remove that. And so my life day to day for most of my 20s, in any given week, would have some day of debilitating pain where I would have to just not participate in life that day, or for a couple of hours or whatnot. And thankfully, one of the miracles in all of that was that many women who are as like far gone with endometriosis as I was, like at the level, they are not able to conceive. And thankfully that was not a problem. I was, been blessed with a beautiful baby boy. And, but a few years after I had Cooper, had to go back. Um, the endometriosis had just completely resurfaced. It was worse. And then I started having really weird things happen. And so in March of 2016, I discovered that I had a ruptured, not a ruptured, a collapsed lung.
Mm.
And when I knew what it felt like, once I knew from the x-ray that's what was happening, and I knew the feeling, I knew that it had been happening for years.
Wow.
And it turns out that I had this rare condition, although I sort of believe it's just underreported, that was causing recurring lung collapses with my hormone cycles. And so I had to have, several procedures, had to have a surgery uh, to get a video camera in there so that they could repair the lung. And we that's when my life really changed. It took just a hard turn to where health and medical intervention has just been kind of like a part of my life. Before then, it was sort of in the backdrop, and after then, everything changed. So we, I ended up that year having probably 7 or 8 chest tubes, and I was in the hospital for maybe 40 days total with all of everything. And I think the lowest point was after I'd already gone through two of these procedures and thought that I was kind of on the mend. I had gone through all of the weight restrictions and recovery. You know how it goes with just literally recovering from them cutting you. It just takes time. And then I had another collapse. And that's when it was like, it was no longer just something, oh, this is like this little interruption in my life. It was like something has fundamentally changed, because I knew at that point what it would be like, right? I knew what that recovery was going to be like. I knew, and I had to go through it all again. They took a lot more interventions that time. So people always love these weird details. Like I had holes in my diaphragm, and there was like blisters on my lung that had to be cut off and sewn up. And the doctor describes the lung as like a lacy sweater.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, when it collapses, it's like it's a little sweater balled up on the floor. And I loved that picture of him just so delicately like stretching the lung out and repairing it. And I started to really think about God as my surgeon, just delicately and skillfully putting me back together and making me better than I had been. So the other thing that I decided, because we couldn't stop them from happening, even after that happened, the lung would stay affixed, but I would still have the pain and the squeezing of it trying to collapse. So I decided later that year that I was done having children. And so I had just a complete, like every reproductive organ removed. I think there was like 15 individual organs that had to be touched in some way. And so I woke up, at 37, like postmenopausal, and experiencing all the things that you experience in your 50s and 60s and 70s, when those hormones plummet. And that was a wild ride. Wild ride. Don't recommend it. But thankfully I was able to get that stabilized, get on the right hormones and all of that to keep that stable. And so I thought, once again, it was like, okay, made it through. That was a year. We were dealing with all sorts of stuff with our kids at the same time. So it just, we thought we're through these woods. And then in 2017, late 2017, my Hashimotos, my autoimmune, it flared it took a different direction, and it started attacking my brain. And so one morning in October, November of that year, I woke up and I had been having like twitches of my arms and legs. And I knew, and we had set an appointment. I knew I needed to talk to someone about it and figure out what was going on. But I woke up one morning and uh, I have a physics and philosophy degree, and I would wake up from surgeries wanting to do crossword puzzles. But I woke up this morning and I could not make sense of numbers on a screen or letters. Like it was just gone.
Mhm.
Like just not able to, not able to process
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
was in front of me.
Mhm.
And it was very scary. It was very scary. And um, you know, thankfully, we were able to get to a specialist down at Emory, and we were able to understand, what this was. It was a kind of encephalitis, which is like a brain swelling,
Right.
and so we're able to. There's treatment. There's all this, and so I was able to recover and learn about in each of these paths, I keep coming to these ends that where what I'm told by the people who know as much as they can is that we don't really know, right? I keep running into these conditions that at the end, I'm with the specialist of all specialists. I'm texting with people in different states, and what has to be accepted is that we just don't know. We don't know why necessarily. We have a lot of theories, and we know that these certain things can work to help control it, but it's just a chronic condition, right? And so uh, so there's been any number. I could zoom in to any number of any places on that timeline and share what God has done, and taught me through those times, because he has certainly kept my attention just squarely fixed on on my own limitations and on my almost my fragility, just
Yeah.
you know uh, so let's see, I could share a few moments of when God's been really, really dear.
Yeah. Let's
um,
let's let's do that. It's man. I feel very much like I felt in a few of these where I'm like, we got to come back and have several more conversations because I want to. There are any number of questions I'd love to follow up on. But no, I think absolutely. I would say, yeah, I'd love to hear the moments where you felt like God has been dear or close to you for sure. But again, I feel like there's any number of things you said that I don't want to let pass by either. So
hmm,
we'll come back to those later. But yeah,
okay.
yeah, I'd love to continue to hear, how God was close to you in some of those moments for sure.
Yeah. Well, um, one uh, one enjoyable like story. I think one of the positives, one of the benefits and blessings of um, having to be, just having no control
Mhm.
is learning to like accept help and care from people close to me, especially my husband. And there's one story where he devised a way in the hospital room to wash my hair
Mhm.
while still protecting all of these wounds by like wrapping me in the shower curtain so that he could
Yeah.
wash my hair. And
Yeah.
that picture of love and
Mhm.
service, I think, has just really stuck with me. Just how we can wax poetic about all these things, but at the end of the day, like, you just need someone to help you, like,
Yeah.
like pull your pants up
Yeah.
sometime.
Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
like it's very
Yeah.
we all revert to being like children
Yeah.
sometimes if certain things are taken away from us.
Mhm.
um but yeah, that moment, I think probably the real one of the real lows was that summertime second surgery, lung surgery, where I already knew all that was ahead of me, and I felt like starting over. And by that point, we had kind of gotten through the romance of being sick,
Yeah.
because there is a little bit of a romance of like, oh, I'm in the hospital, oh, people are sending cards and flowers, and all of that is very sweet. And
Sure.
you know but we were sort of done with
Right.
with that.
Yeah.
And we had maxed out all of the favors and asking people to keep kids and make dinner and all this stuff. And so it was a hard time. It was a real strain on our relationship, just because Greg was needed by the kids and by, we both run our own businesses, and we're not just replaceable, although we have a great team. And so I was alone for a lot of that summertime. I was alone, and it was the right thing. It was what was needed for our family, but it was very lonely. And I just had such dread. I just felt sure that I wasn't going to make it. And I had just tremendous fear of my child growing up without me, um, and just of being broken. And so there was one very sweet morning where, um, I was attached to all these tubes and had tubes inside me, um, and someone had read Psalm 23. It just reminded me of Psalm 23. And um, I imagined that Jesus really was like this shepherd, like holding my little broken body and like bandaging me. And that was when I started envisioning him as my surgeon, and just putting ointment on and bandaging me and just holding me. And the other psalm at that time that was such a blessing was Psalm 121. Um, you know, I remember looking out of the hospital windows a lot, and just repeating over and over. I could see on one of those days I could see Lavender Mountain in the distance, and I remember, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my hope come from? My hope, my strength comes from the Lord. He doesn't slumber or sleep. He watches over you. He will guard you. And that just was my just prayer, just my, my whole body was consumed with that desire and longing. And that really is the only thing that got me through all that, just fear and dread of not just the pain I knew I was going to have, but what I didn't know,
Yeah.
and what could be. Yeah, that was a really good one.
Yeah.
The when the brain stuff is funny because it kind of challenges every notion of like what it is to be a person. So like if I can't if I can't uh, think, like if I can't understand what's happening around me, and if I'm not able to like give words to other people, what am I? Like
Mhm.
there were some days that I would feel like I'm just a sack of cells, like I'm just a sack of mass, like in a place in the universe,
Right.
and I am producing nothing of value. I am offering nothing to anyone else. In fact, I'm like costing them. Like
Right.
like I require them. And um I can't even I'm doing nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I would find myself like, do I exist? Like like
Yeah.
how do I know I exist if I can't like, I mean, I'm just getting sensations from the world, right? I have pain, I have discomfort, and I'm just taken in like lights and sounds. And it was very humbling. It was
Yep.
very, very humbling. And to realize how dependent we are
Yep.
on these very tiny fluctuations of hormones in our
Yep.
body,
Yep.
to allow us to think, to allow us to like be at the right temperature, to allow us to like function. Like it's really delicate. Um, and of course we do matter.
Yeah.
Like of course I did matter, even when I
Right.
um, couldn't offer anything to the world. But uh, so that's great. It's terrible, tragic news that like we that we in some sense are really not, we are just this sack of things
Right.
that we sort of just play at thinking that we can control and direct,
Yeah.
but then it's also this like wonderful news
Yeah.
that even if even if I can do nothing but
Right.
just sit
Right.
and trust God
Right.
in that,
Yeah.
like that's it. That's like I have worth and I have value,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and God can use me,
Yeah.
even if it's just me believing, if it's
Right.
just me saying,
Right.
though you slay me, though you
Yeah.
take away all of these things from my like function,
Yep.
yet I will trust in you.
Right.
Like if that's the only thing I can do in any one day,
Yep.
like I had to get to the place where I accepted that
Yep.
like that was okay. That
Yeah.
was an okay day.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's funny you say that, because I think it's John 6:29 where people come to Jesus and say, "Hey, what's the work we must do to inherit eternal life?" And I think Jesus says, in answer to that question, he says, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent." And so it's interesting because, you framed that struggle with, what am I worth if I can't really offer anything? And it's interesting because the answer is, yeah, I think you answered the question by saying maybe all you offer is just your belief to God. But in that is all that is required, is the work that God requires from us. So I think that's a beautiful picture of you understanding your worth to God and what is required of you. Very much less than we think, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have been a person of will. I'm a very defiant person, in all good and bad ways.
Yeah, yeah,
uh, you know, um, I've really seen myself and my life in terms of what I did or what I accomplished or what I learned, and really the last few years has been this like this change, this shift in the way I think about myself, and that those things they're a part of our life for sure, but that our identity and our our nature, it's deeper than that, and um, there's just something more fundamental.
yeah,
It's it's given me such a deep uh, and strong desire to make sure that I'm treating others that way,
yeah,
and that I am not. I think that I was guilty of, even though I wouldn't have said it, I was guilty of thinking about people in terms of what they're capable of,
right,
um, and maybe valuing um, people who were capable of, you think about networking or building relationships, and you think about like, well, this person is so great at this thing,
yeah,
and it's a good thing to be mindful of each other's strengths and what they can contribute and offer,
yeah,
but what I've learned is that I really I've stripped away that has been stripped away from me in terms of, you know, really thinking about like I've been the least of these in this experience of just not being able to do anything, not being able to move, not being able to
yeah,
and being just in complete trust of the people around me to care for me and my body, and so it's given me such a heart for those who you know who are struggling, and who are without maybe without the whatever capacity, right, with disabilities, with um, other struggles. I mean, obviously I still had the advantages of insurance and home and food and means and all that, and so it breaks my heart to think about the people who go through and are dealing with any sort of chronic experiences without those things, right? Because I have seen how leveling it is, even when there's a position of advantage.
yeah,
And so it's made me very sensitive. I started a few groups, because these are all kind of rare conditions. I started little Facebook groups, and it's so humbling because there's several maybe up to 10 women a week will join these
Wow.
groups. And so I know that there are people who are having, we're all telling our stories and we're sharing those things. And so we know that it's not just us, we're not alone. It's just that medicine hasn't yet figured, it hasn't, there's still a lot of work to be done at these intersections of healthcare, like these
Okay.
intersections of different systems and
Yep.
chronic conditions. And so we're trying to figure that out together
Yeah.
and learn from each other. And so it's made me really want to advocate and represent and speak up for those who cannot,
Right.
and make sure we stay sensitive to those in our midst who might not be able to tell us that they're struggling.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
It strikes me that one of the themes from your story is that part of what you realized or experienced about how God views you is was through the people caring for you when you had nothing to offer, when you couldn't do anything for them, and yet they still cared for you, they still valued you. And it's interesting, I think, to hear the voice of God through other people sometimes. And
Hmm.
part of that voice of God to us is, I love you not because of what you do, but because of who you are.
Hmm.
And that, again, should remind us of the fact that God calls us to be daughters and sons. And the way that, you look at Cooper, the way that I look at my kids, I don't value them because of what they do for me. I value them because of who they are. And
Right.
so it's just this great picture to be able to see that we don't always have to be offering something to God. We can simply sit back sometimes and let him care for us. And so
Yeah.
your story is a great picture of that.
Yeah, I hope so. Uh, I've I think I shared this with you a little bit, but I've really been, forced to think about basically choosing suffering, like um, accepting the fact that God chose suffering for me. And so if I accept suffering as if I chose it, it does allow me to suffer well. It allows me to receive blessing
Yep.
in the midst of it. And it has even allowed, it has allowed me to get to the place where I can even be grateful for the pain and misery and confusion. And because of what it has, it's sort of, you think about the rain that's required to carve out a canyon, is kind of the picture that I carry with me, that um, you know being grateful for all of that, because it has created a really deep place in me to 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 just sort of hold God's love.
Right.
um, and certainly there are days where I don't have them so much anymore, but yeah, it's just it was years ago. I just stopped asking why. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to. It's not helpful. And it doesn't make anything any better.
Yeah.
I am definitely still pursuing like root cause and sort of really understanding the body and all these delicate, wonderful ways that the body is made.
Yeah.
um, but ultimately, um, just trusting.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. That's a great place for us to sort of wrap it up. I've been telling a lot of the people that we've been doing this with that we are going to need to have you back because there's more to your story, clearly. But thank you so much for sharing everything with me. I feel like just from one of my takeaways is just your recitation of Psalm 121, which interestingly was my verse of the day for yesterday. So that's very apropos for me. So thank you so much for being willing to share all of that with us.
Sure. Thank you.
All
Yep.
right, we'll have you
Pleasure
back.
done.
Thank you,
All
Tricia.
right. Bye-bye.